see 800 million people lifted out of poverty. I see a country that was once the sick man of Asia, with free trade imposed on it by the British Empire, breaking out of that, having, at this point, half the steel in the world is made in China's state-controlled steel industry. At this point, before the pandemic, the tourism industry of the world was having a boom because millions of Chinese people whose grandparents were illiterate peasants were going on vacation for the first time, right, in generations. I mean, huge achievements. Electrification. This was a country that didn't have running water, that didn't have electricity. Millions raised out of poverty. I mean, it's astronomical. China at this point, they're making better phones than Western capitalism is. They have the world's fastest supercomputers. The achievements are astronomical. This is a whole society that has lifted itself up by its bootstraps. It is an argument for the fact that growth can take place beyond capitalism. And when the economy is controlled by the state and humans are mobilized to build and construct and unleash their creativity and brilliance, great things can be achieved. And yes, the Cultural Revolution was a disaster, right? That was a disaster. And during the Cultural Revolution, they rejected the basic premise of Marxism, which is that growth is necessary. Marxism is an ideology that is based on growth. It argues that we need to get the economy out of the irrationality of profits and command, right? Under societies of the past, people were homeless because there wasn't enough housing. Only under capitalism are people homeless because there is too much housing. That happened during the financial crisis. The housing bubble burst. People couldn't afford to buy all the houses that exist. And we had tent cities set up in Nevada because people were homeless because there were too many houses. That's not rational. Under capitalism, right? Under capitalism, people are hungry, not because there's not enough food, but because there's too much food. This is irrational. Profits, this magical invisible hand, doesn't care. And when societies are able to break out of that and rationally organize the economy, they can have big achievements. I think China is proof of that. Cuba is proof of that. Other societies around the world are proof of that. Did they have big problems, as you endlessly pointed out in your opening statement? Of course. I'm not going to deny human rights violations. I'm not going to deny that bad things happened. But there is hope to get beyond the irrational rule of profits. We can have state planning of the economy and have good achievements. And China's dramatic turnaround and economic achievements are proof of that.
Do you think that Hong Kong, which didn't go through the mass slaughters that China went through, wouldn't it have been better if China had had some more free markets relative to what happened in China? So China's the number one slaughterer of its own citizens in a much shorter time frame than Russia, right? So Russia, 1917 to 1987, we had almost 62 million people. China, about half the time, 1949 to 1987, killed almost 77 million people. Almost 77 million people. Now that is, we can't even comprehend, right? So Hong Kong didn't go through that kind of slaughter, and they certainly did have a free market relative to China. Do you think that the non-slaughterhouse, there were deaths, of course, and there was repression from the British and all, but nothing compared to the democide that occurred, or the slaughters that occurred in China. Do you think that the Hong Kong model in any way is superior to the China model, just in terms of, there not being 77 million people killed?
Well, I have two responses to that. First of all, I believe the biggest trading partner with Hong Kong is mainland China, and that Hong Kong's successes have a lot to do and walk hand in hand with China's successes on the mainland. Second of all, are you contending that this big number you threw out there, all those people were executed? They got death sentences from the Chinese government? Is that what you're saying?
No,
this 70 million people?
Well,
no. I'm asking you, they were given death sentences? They were shot? Is that what you're contending?
Do you not know these numbers?
I've heard big numbers like this, but they tend to be based on the fact that famines took place.
Well, no, but there's famines, and then there's famines that result from specific state policies, such as the collectivization of the farmland, as I mentioned before, occurred in Ukraine, and other places also occurred in China. So, when you have state policies that where food can no longer be produced because the government has taken over and is not distributing the land to anybody effective, and also because they're withholding food as a form of punishment for class enemies such as the large landholders that were quite productive in farming, yeah, there is a lot of deaths that occur from that, for sure. These are not just natural famines.
Right. So all those famines I listed earlier, like the British Empire in Iran, for example, blocking grain imports to Iran and starving 8 to 10 million people in 1917 to 1919, like the Bengal famine of 1943, which Winston Churchill joked about, where 3 million Indian people died. Does that all tarnish the reputation of capitalism? But, it's not real capitalism, right? I forgot.
You did forget.
Okay. It's not real capitalism. Not real capitalism. Not real capitalism.
So just try.
I'm sorry. May I respond? May I finish responding? I didn't interrupt you. Now, I believe it was because of the Chinese Communist Party that the mass starvation and famines that had gone on in China for hundreds of years, most especially after the British took over, were ended. It was China and the Communist Party that brought tractors to rural villages. It was China and the Communist Party that created China's modern food production system. So you're blaming them for problems in the food production system, but not giving them credit for the fact that they built it.
I guess I'm just curious. So if you can just walk over 77 million...
No.
Bodies,
I mean, we're glitch-glopping.
Is there a number
we're glitch-glopping.
of dead that would give you pause? I'm just like, is it 80 million? Is it 100 million? What if it was 150? Is there some number of...
When did I ever defend any atrocity? When did I ever say that some atrocity... You're being completely intellectually dishonest there.
My point?
Okay.
Just out of curiosity. Okay, thanks. Just what is the number? What is the number of dead people that would give you some pause about this system? Because it's not 77 million people plus the 62 million from the USSR, so it's some number, and I'm just like, it's not 130, 140 million or whatever. There's some number, and I'm just curious what that number is, wherein you would have some pause about your willingness to give a small number of people massive power over the economy and over other people's lives. Is there a number? Like, is it north of 130 million? Would it be 150 million that might make you think something would be awry? I'm just curious what that number is. Is there any upward limit? Could it be 1 billion people killed and you'd still be fine with the system? I'm just curious.
Are you finished? At no point did I ever say that violations of human rights, the killing of innocent people, was justified. At no point did I ever say that. So by trying to put words in my mouth like that, you're being completely intellectually dishonest. I said that China's economic achievements, as the result of its central planned economy, were good. And I think 800 million people lifted out of poverty, the construction of a modern country, one of the poorest countries in the world, becoming the second largest economy in the world, is a good thing. Whenever an innocent person is killed, whenever, economic policies are problematic and have negative results, that's a bad thing. Please don't try to paint me as an apologist for mass murder to cover up the reality of what I'm saying. I'm pointing toward economic successes. I'm pointing toward real achievements, and you are pointing to human rights violations and atrocities to discredit that. I just read you all these crimes of capitalism, and then you said that's not real capitalism.
No, I condemn those crimes.
I think capitalism exists in the world today.
Perpetuated.